so that then you have a ratio of 1 to 10. So the actual voltage is, I believe, like for example, the actual voltage is 11. Then on my device it says that the actual voltage is 0 volt, and those 1. So it's a 1-to-10 ratio, and then I can measure it through my motor. Another problem is the device, like the device that it's confusing. When I hit the device, it just cancels because it takes that many ticks. So I have another problem, but that one is fixable. That's just like, that's not too big of a problem. So I think I know it. How far are you? I'm your first transfer. So all of your plus, sine, minus, everything you're gonna say, don't come back.
You the link maybe of Zoom meeting, and I will ask a couple of things. If you unmute yourself, and I will mute my microphone.
Okay, so then I will say this.
Yeah, but I will need to mute your speakers because we use speakers always it sounds like an echo.
And you emailed it to me, right?
Pardon?
You sent me an email.
I sent you already.
I get it.
Yes. I didn't. Okay. Where you going? Just not missing any other classes, right?
Maybe.
Just English here and this one. Yeah. Okay.
Wait, last year we also had to.
And that was it, I think.
Oh, no, where? Yeah, why?
We had econ there. That's self-taught, yeah.
Yeah, we have those there as well.
Yeah, I know that. I know that. Yeah. You're always sitting right in the right corner of the class. Yeah. And also sitting in the back.
Yeah.
It was not that bad. But you know also talking.
I'll probably run and get my charger halfway through.
Oh, yeah. Maybe we can oh, okay. I don't know, table, but let's try it so far and see how it goes.
No, why? The first one is kind of like you need to add like the point is local minimal maximum.
Hello. Samuel, we can't hear anything. Thank you.
Hi guys, I just want to test the microphone. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear.
Okay, good. And you muted your.
Yeah, I
1, 2, 3.
Oh, I think she's the microphone on that one.
Okay, you unmute yourself.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3. Oh, there you go. Then. Okay, let's do this better. Can you hear me again?
Yes.
Perfect. So I'm gonna use my mic, and if it's difficult to listen, then I'm gonna switch to JP's, who is helping us to project what you see in the board. Okay. So let's see. Okay, so we may not see the chat. So if you have a question, perhaps you can just jump in and do not write into the chat because I won't be able to follow up. And I'm gonna share the screen now. Okay. Hello, that's fine. Okay, guys, so I know this is maybe the worst time of the day and the week to have a class because it's Friday, the last block. You're tired, I'm tired, but we move on. So I try to make the class not as boring as usually they can be, but let's see if we can start this a little more interactive. So I want to start by sharing what are we going to look at today. Remember that we are just reviewing the macroeconomics chapter. We have talked about Keynesian policies so far. Today we will start the class by just making some evaluation, pros and cons of Keynesian policies. This is very helpful for you when you are making your examinations, but also for your IAs. You can use these arguments to have a chapter or a paragraph of evaluation in your IAs because that's something that's very important. It's going to be actually 4 marks of the IA that is just about evaluation, okay? And then we're gonna mention the Phillips curve. This is a higher level topic, but for those who are, all of you, I think are higher level, but if anyone is taking standard level from online, you can use this argument. You will see how the graph looks. It's very easy to use, and it's very solid argument to use also for evaluating Keynesian policy. So let's use it. We're going to go deeper on the Phillips curve next, I would say in January, when we have just a class for high level dedicated to the Phillips curve, okay? And then we're going to talk about supply side policies. That's going to be half of the class. So let's say after one break, we may talk about the supply side policies, or a little bit before we take a break, and then we are free to go for the weekend, okay? Good. That looks very nice, but hopefully not too boring. Okay, what we see in the screen, and I just want to double check just to make sure that online, are you seeing the slideshow on the screen?
Yes.
Thank you. So let's see what's going on here. I would like anyone to see the chart, or all of you to see the chart, but anyone to react to this chart, if you can share to the rest of the class a story behind this chart. Let's build a story behind it. What can you tell about this? Anything that you want to refer to? There are lots of information that you can focus on, but we want you to build a story behind it. So maybe you can start explaining what this chart is about. JP.
Your question, we can build another story. So,
How about starting defining what the graph is, and then you can refer to it.
so this graph shows like a steady rate of growth, and then there's a big recession, and then there's a recovery, and then it goes back to like a steady rate of growth. You could say the recession was caused by maybe like a natural disaster, like a big hurricane, so that destroyed the economy of a country. And then
Add some information. Actually, this was the USA, and then you can refer also to years to refer when to see the recession taking place.
okay, so the recession around 1930, and then maybe 1938, and then the economy started to climb again. And after the recession, there was a higher rate of growth than before the recession, and maybe that was because during the recession, the government had to invest in capital goods. So then after the recession, the economy was more productive, and when it went back to the full employment, it was at a higher rate of growth because the factors of production were more productive.
Very well, very nice. Anyone else that wants to add something else that we want perhaps to add that JP didn't mention?
I guess like also the surge in production is like in the Keynes model of the idea of like the grand project, and in that case it was the US joining World War II. So they shifted all their production and then intensely began producing.
Great. So actually we can see how just after the big depression, as we call it in the 30s, the recession was taking place. We call this actually a W-shaped recovery. As you can tell here, is a W. Sometimes we call a V-type recovery. That's what right now everybody's talking about, the coronavirus recession, that it may recover very quickly. So we just go like this. Sometimes we may refer to this as an L. That means there's no recovery. And some people also refer to this type of recovery as a U-shaped recovery. So all of that is that you will be reading eventually, and this V-type or W-type or W is what we saw happening in the USA. Now, what Mike was also sharing is that in the 40s, in the global context, what was happening in the world during the 40s, yeah, the World War II, and we say, well, the World War II helped the USA to also to boost its economy. Was not really affected by the war, but was impacted positively by sending, troops and then managing to boost their economy by producing goods and services for the war. So even just paying for the civilians and the soldiers, and then making uniforms and all of that actually boosted the economy of the USA without the USA being destroyed. So that's an interesting thing that we may think also about what happened after the 40s. And then we see these two trends, as JP was mentioning. The first trend, which is having a certain slope, and then I try to separate both just to see how before and after the big depression, we see the production trend line or the productivity in the long run has changed in the USA. Okay, and we will refer to that a little bit later when we talk about supply side policies as well. Any comments or any questions so far? This is what we have been discussing in terms of Keynesian policies. Actually, were born here. This is where Keynes proposed his ideas of fiscal and monetary policies in order to boost the economy. And they worked, actually, they worked well. And still we are using those when we see recessions coming up, which is what all governments in the world are doing right now. So let's evaluate pros and cons of Keynesian policies. Okay? So let's see if you can help us to build here positive and negative impacts of Keynesian or demand side policies.
to boost it just enough, but not to like make it overproductive.
Can be okay. The amount of stimulus spending could be really hard to quantify. We don't really know what to stop, but this is what we're looking right now. Lots of money is being injected. Now we don't know how households are using the money. Some of them are actually saving the money for the future. So consumption is not really boosted. Investors are perhaps not investing in the country, but they are taking that money and investing it overseas. So there's a lot of things behind determining the stimulus money, and not necessarily having an idea of how much dedicate to the public budget for this. So that's a good thing to start with.
Yes, another coin could be equal to debt.
Good. And that's kind of the bigger one, isn't it? All this stimulus money means debt. What else?
Like, I don't know if it's really common, but like for example, in some countries there's a lot of money on saving accounts, and with doing these kind of policies, people don't feel the need to spend that saving money, and they keep it on the bank. So you keep having like kind of money out of the economy.
Okay, I'm going to use the concept of liquidity trap. Okay, and I think we mentioned it the other day, but just to mention it again, the liquidity trap, in other words, means that because of the monetary policies, I'm going to refer particularly to the monetary policies of reducing interest rates. Remember, we said lower interest rates may enhance consumption and also may impact investment in an inverse relationship. Lower interest rates, more investment for more consumption. That means because people have more availability of cash, or borrowing money is cheaper, isn't it? And the liquidity trap is, Keynes was saying, maybe there's lots of free money or very cheap money to be available for us to borrow, but people are not using the money, as you were saying, for the purposes of consumption or investment. That means there's lots of money, liquid money or money available, but it's not being really used. So in other words, this slope that should have a certain slope is totally inelastic. So there's no response on the interest rate changing by consumers and investors. Yes, Alex?
I have a question about that. I was reading an article that was talking about a marginal propensity to save and consume. Does that come into the liquidity trap?
Good point. Can you remember, or
It was talking about, like, in a population, how likely that population saved like $100 extra. How much of that are they likely to save, and how much of that are they likely to spend? I think it's like 1/1 minus the.
Yeah, okay, that's a multiplier effect. And actually, we will talk a little bit about the multiplier eventually in a higher level topic, but let's think about, you may think about this situation. This is a real life situation that you may absorb for yourself. Let's say that today you receive $100 today from a group. What percentage of those $100 here, being at Pearson College with the circumstances that you are right now, what percentage of that additional income will be used for consumption, and what percentage would you use for savings, which is future consumption? So we go around. I'm not going to take the time, but think about from these 100, maybe Alex, how much would you consider percentage-wise? Half, 100%.
I'm not really spending any money at the moment. So.
Maybe all of it will go to savings. And perhaps all of you will have the same idea, because right now you cannot even go out. Would you spend it in something?
I'll spend some slides.
Good. And usually that's what I hear when I ask this question in Pearson. They say, well, I will use 50% to invite my house parents. I will use 50 to buy snacks. I will use another 50 just to save them. Some people say, well, I have SATs, I have to pay for it, etc. So it depends on who are you. But overall, and that's an important concept, we call them marginal propensity. So marginal propensity to consume or marginal propensity to save as the percentage that is dedicated to either save or consume the additional income that is being injected. And that has to do with these injections. So there's this Economist article that they are showing in the, it's very late in the latest economic magazine, they are saying that most of the people are actually saving it instead of spending it. And what we see, usually what happens is that poor households, how do you think the marginal propensity for poor households is? Do you think that it goes more towards consumption or towards savings? Consumption. So poor households have a high marginal propensity to consume. And again, Bill Gates, another $100 is nothing for him. So save all of it. So poor countries will perhaps consume more for an injection than rich countries. And inside a country, poor households versus rich households. But that study that you're mentioning is showing that most of the people, regardless if they're poor or not, they are saving money, which is an interesting thing, which is breaking the idea of the stimulus money dedicated towards consumption, and then that is not really making the impact that we are pursuing in terms of fiscal policies. Good. The multiplier effect, we will talk about that later. Okay, so any other cons or pros that you would, yeah, let's hear Sky and then over here.
Like the pressure, when the market doesn't have the ability to adjust itself, like you might have also explain how the economy.
Good. So that it works. We may say the GDP will definitely grow. It's something that we may expect to happen, or at least the recession will stop. At least that. So that's something that we expect to happen. What else? Kind of. Good. So because the GDP is growing, remember we said that the AD is shifting out. I'm going to label everything. We have a trade-off because the GDP is growing, but the expense or the cost of that will be a pressure on the price level. That is the tension model, and we know that that's going to happen. So inflation could be the cost of the GDP growing. Kaim and NJP.
I was going to say, well, it happens relatively fast compared to just letting the market correct for itself.
Okay, it's faster, which we expect. We don't really have evidence to say that the market will correct it faster or not, but we expect the market to wait until it's really at the bottom. We don't know when the bottom will be achieved, but faster than, let's put it here, free market, which is a solid argument, it's a good argument to use because that is what Keynes was arguing when he proposed this.
First of all, it limits the like recession, like the depth of the recession.
Okay.
And secondly, and that's kind of building on the points that are made at the pros, is like that it revokes trust in people. Because that's one of the most important things in an economy, that there is trust in the government's ability to help the people if they would get out of a job, for example. So I think that one's also really important.
Good. That's also very important. How about unemployment? What do you think unemployment is going to be? What's going to happen with unemployment after Keynesian policies are taking place? And that's also one of the goals of these policies, to reduce unemployment. Good. Some people may actually argue, and that's again part of your conversation when you evaluate these type of policies. Well, what type of employment is being created? Is it just bureaucracy? Then we are expecting that maybe it is becoming a problem in the future because you're just hiring people for the sake of hiring, which is the purpose of these policies. But if you're just hiring people to be sitting in a desk all day, putting a stamp, that is creating more problems of efficiency in the long run. In the short run, it may provide jobs, but in the long run, as they call it, you are building red tape, as they call it in the jargon. Okay, so now we have lots of arguments here. You can evaluate if you have something that you would like to add in terms of a particular context. You may add it, but then again, you have to support it. Okay, but this is a very good picture of pros and cons. Good. Let's use one more graph to. Okay, yeah, the crowding out effect. We didn't mention it, but it's another argument against Keynesian policies. And usually the crowding out effect is being It's been done by the neoclassicals. The school of thought that is against Keynes will use the crowding out effect. And what this is telling us, in other words, very simple. They say the government is actually taking over the private otherwise investment that could have happened if the government didn't intervene. Now that could have happened, we don't really know if it would happen, but they have an argument, they meaning the neoclassical, saying, well, if there's a certain amount of money available for lending, okay, this is in the private banks, and that money is going to be borrowed by the government, because the government, again, needs the money for funding these public projects. So that is shifting out the aggregate demand and is making pressure on the interest rate of those private banks that they have that money available. Now that brings us to the same relation between higher interest rates, lower rate of private investment. And that is actually what then they say that will bring back. Okay. Move this away from here. So bring back the aggregate demand, which was supposed to go back to the full employment because of the government expenditure, may be brought back, and that the crowding out effect is crowded out, because then investment, instead of investing at the interest rate that was prevailing, now they're going to be discouraged of investing, and then this actually brings back the aggregate demand. So you can use actually this graph, or just mention that the aggregate demand, instead of going all the way to where it was supposed to go, is just stopping before because of the crowding.
Why isn't the monetary policy for reducing the government interest rate? Why isn't it like counteract that so that doesn't happen?
Yeah, and that's again the counter argument of Keynes, which he was saying, if this is happening, then the central bank should intervene to lower the interest rate back again. And that's the conversation, because now they say, well, the private banks, they still want to make money, and they will increase the interest rate as long as there's someone that is willing to borrow the money that they have. And because a limited amount of money is either the government or the privates who are going to be receiving it. And that's the other argument of crowding out. If the money is just available for either privates or government, then the government is taking it from the privates, and then still is going to be happening.
Why can't the government control monetary policy as well? Why does it have to be central bank and the government, and they're not supposed to like work together? No.
Anyone wants to answer that? Yeah, Max. Hey, Alex, sorry.
Because if the government can control monetary policy, they can manipulate the economy in terms of like getting elected. So like, say it's coming up to an election, they could like slash interest rates, even if that was like going to tank the economy, just so that people have like a short increase in money, say, or whatever, and then so the people are happy, they'll vote for them, even though they've like screwed the economy in the long run. But they can manipulate the economy for political gain.
For political gain, that would be the summary of what Alex is saying.
Can they not do the same with government spending?
What's that?
Can they not do the same with government spending?
The thing is that the government has a certain amount of money available, like you and me and everyone in this classroom has a certain amount of money available, and if they need more money, they need to ask for the central bank to print that money for them. But it's not just print the money for me. The central bank will ask them, well, why do you want that money? And if you want money, you have to borrow it from me. I cannot just print money for you. So that is quite new, because when the monetary policies were actually originated, the central bank was the branch of the government that printed money. And we saw lots of problems of inflation taking place, because government would just print money without having any limits. So there was a change in the central bank's mandate to just be a technical and separate from the political aspect of the government. And then you have a question at first.
Yeah, actually, like, this is not like, is the central bank that deciding money, or is it the government that's selling money?
Another great question. The central bank has the mandate to control inflation in a country. That's an overall view of central bankers nowadays. That's the mainstream view of the role of a central bank. So if that is the overall view, then the central bank should only control inflation, and they can release money into circulation or take away money from circulation by using, remember we mentioned the open market operations the last class? Those are the tools that they use. Selling bonds, buying bonds, reducing the reserve ratio for the savings, controlling interest rates. All of that will allow more money to be in circulation and less money. That is what we call printing money. And they actually have their, well, how do we say, bodega? Anyone who has Spanish here? No, not in this class. How do you say storage? They say they have stored the money. Actually, the physical money is stored in your central bank's vaults. That's what they have it. And then they decide to print it or not.
Isn't it that, like, as of right now, for example, euro, 80% of the euros that are existing are not in print. Like it's not even, there's not even a font, a coin or anything to back it up at the moment anymore.
Okay.
It's just a digital number right now.
It's just a currency that is
Yeah.
That's another new thing that also is taking place. And you have a question over there? Okay. Susie?
Yeah. My question has like it actually relates to like central banking. Like sometimes central bank like kind of change currency, like change the money. Like for my country personally, like we actually like we had a currency, but then we changed the currency, like it got new different money, and that like kind of got inflation because we had like the old money and then now we have new money. So I don't know like why in the case.
Yeah. What is your currency now?
Like it was Liberian naira, like it's Liberian naira. But then like they changed like the money, like they added new money. Like we had like $5 bill,
Okay.
but now they got like 500 bill. So like we didn't have 500 bill, but it got 500 bill.
Okay, I offer to go to that question when we go to exchange rates, because we're going to be talking about why some countries have different currencies, and then we will talk actually also why the central banks decide sometimes to change currencies over time, like what happened in the country, and why some other countries decide to adopt, for example, a common currency like the US dollar in El Salvador. They are using the US dollar, or in Europe, the euro, except for Britain, that they didn't want to adopt it, and now Denmark also has it, that's right. And there are a couple more that are part of the EU that didn't adopt the euro, but we will actually talk about that and what does that mean. Okay, so that's why, because we're going to have a mindset of money when we go to there. Good, let's move on. So this is another argument that you can use to evaluate Keynesian policies. Okay, the negative side of Keynesian policies could be the crowding out effect and the trade-off between inflation and unemployment, which we will just summarize in what we call the Phillips curve. Okay, so the Phillips curve is a very easy graph to use. I encourage you to use it, even in your IAs if you want to use it. I know that Julia has told you that in your IAs you should use one graph. I encourage you to use at least two. And why is that? It's because we have a component in your markings that is about analysis. And that component actually is two parts of your markings, which is 6 points. That is about just analysis, and one of them is about using graphs. The other one is analyzing or applying the context into an analytical way. And the way that we use that to evaluate that part is via diagrams. So it's going to be better for you to have two diagrams. If you have a mistake in one, at least you can enforce the mistake on the other one, or let's say correct it. Or you will have a very solid analysis if you use at least two graphs. Okay. The only problem with that is sometimes the word count gets really tight, and maybe that's why Julia is suggesting just use one. But yeah. Question one. So let's put here what the Phillips curve, what the trade-off between inflation and unemployment is. Inflation rate and unemployment rate. Okay, this is in rates. And let's say we have an inflation rate of, I'm going to put here maybe a 10%, very high inflation rate. So we already said that Keynes had this trade-off between approaching to the full employment means pressure on the price level. So how should you draw a line that is reflecting the trade-off between low unemployment but high inflation? How should be that relationship here? Zero. We're saying there's a trade-off. Inverse relationship, wouldn't it? I'm gonna draw it like this. We draw it like a curve. Later we will see why it is a curve, but this is the idea of the what we will call the Phillips curve. So let's say maybe a 10% of inflation is 2% of unemployment, okay? And the opposite may be also true. 3% of inflation may be a high rate of unemployment, okay? So this graph is telling us that if the policies of the government are to reduce unemployment, you will have, on the other hand, higher inflation. And otherwise, it's also true. Okay. Again, the rationale behind this is when you are approaching to the full employment level, is that you are making more pressure on the price level because now wages are going to be higher and higher because labor is going to be scarcer and scarcer or more scarce. Okay, so that's why we have this inflation. So pretty simple graph to use, pretty easy to explain and to show, and this is a good tool to evaluate pension policies because this will always happen in the short run. It's either or. Okay.
Is this kind of the same as the long-run average supply, like the Keynesian model?
It's exactly the same. It's the mirror of that, but the only thing is that here, price level. Here we don't really have the unemployment level explicitly. We have it implicitly. So here you have actually the unemployment rate expressed. Here you have GDP. So you want to refer to unemployment and inflation. Here you're talking about growth and inflation. So change of GDP and inflation. There's change in unemployment and inflation. So it's just a mirror effect of this full employment level. Okay.
Ways of drawing, like you can either draw the long-run average supply like Keynes, which is the curve, or you could draw it with like the long-run average supply in the short run.
We're not, because that's our purpose of the remaining of the class. The supply side policies are going to use the model of the long run, and you will be able to differentiate this Keynesian graph from the other one that we're learning today or reviewing today. But you will answer that question: when should I use this, or when should I use the new classical? You should be very comfortable with the end of the class. This class. Yeah.
So the inflation is coming here. The inflationary pressure, is that supply side inflationary pressure because it's doing unemployment? On the Phillips curve?
No, it's not the supply side, it's the demand side, because the aggregate demand is the one that is shifting and hiring. Well, both of them are together because the demand is the one that is being pressed or pushed. And because the demand is pushing out, that is making the firms to produce more. Does that make sense? And in order to produce more, they have to hire workers. So that is what we're looking at here. Any other questions or comments? This or the Phillips curve. So the Phillips curve, in other words, is just the relationship between the inflation rate and the unemployment rate of a country. High unemployment rate means low inflation rate. This is what this curve is telling us. Why is that so? This is important for you to explain. Why, if we are approaching to zero unemployment, why does that affect the price level up? Why does it push the prices up? The answer is, look at the Keynesian model. If we're approaching to the full employment, remember we said this is the full employment level, this is the limit of the economy to produce. And when we're approaching closer to this limit, the results are so scarce that hiring an additional unit of labor will be more and more expensive in proportion to that additional labor being high. So that is when we see this pressure of inflation going up when unemployment is coming down. Yes. Good. Any questions online? Okay. So now we're going to use the remaining time of the class to go to the supply side policies. I'm going to try to make it again steady but fast, because I assume that you know a lot of things so far. So I'm going to keep asking questions for you to build, for us to build this theory together. Okay. So I'm drawing on purpose this business cycle in this shape, but this is only theoretical. This doesn't happen in real life. And please, I want you to tell me, why do you think that this is not what we expect to happen in real life? Looking at a business cycle over time, thinking this could be years. And again, remember, this is the GDP. So who wants to tell us the story behind this graph that I just draw? What does that mean? What do you think this is about? Anything is valid here. I mean,
No, but now I'm lost in your question. First time you were saying, like, why is it not real life? But now I'm confused.
good. I'm going to put numbers here because those numbers could be helpful for you. Let's change currency. Now talk about euros. So I'm going to use a number 100 here. Let me add something else. Let's say that the population of this economy is also 100 people. And I'm going to put here point A, 120, and maybe point B, 80, just to put random numbers here. And let's see if you can explain to the rest of the class what does this mean using the numbers, using the points, using the little guy that is there drawn.
So this is the business cycle of a country where there's no inflation because the expansions and contractions are equal over the period of time. And one of the reasons, maybe it's because the population is 100 and maybe the population just never changes. So they just keep on producing the same amount at full employment. Or full employment is static, I guess.
Great, that's a very interesting way of putting it. And then you're adding here, perhaps this population is not changing also over time. And then everybody's doing the same activity of producing, but this economy is keeping its level of production stable over time. Very well analyzed so far. And then we can also add more salt and pepper on this.
I get confused on one thing he says because it's real GDP, right?
Yeah.
So that's adjusted for inflation. So you can conclude from this graph that there's no inflation, right?
You can't see it.
Know that because you take a base year, right?
Yeah, that's correct. But you could speculate. Now,
Yeah, that's speculation.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. But so far we don't see it. You're right. What else can we say from those numbers? We have the 100 euros, 120, and 80. Who wants to explain us what these numbers mean and why did I wrote point A and point B and the numbers here? Anything that you want to talk about these points A, B, and the 100? And yeah, I'm sorry, I know you speak very quietly, but if you can raise your volume a little bit so they can hear you.
Also, usually the economy in a country is unstable because of like different things that happen in a country. For example, a natural disaster happened and caused recession. So, for example, the graph that we saw just a minute ago, there was the growth was stable point, and then the recession happened and caused the to increase the past.
Yeah.
It doesn't show in this graph.
That is not showing this graph. That's correct. So we don't really know if this economy has faced a natural disaster or not. We don't really know. Maybe it happened here, but then recovered back again at the same level. So they didn't even recover in a different way than before, but they recovered the same way that they were producing before between this time. But we don't know if this is really a natural disaster. Yeah, what else? I want to hear other voices. Let's see if someone else wants to add more things here by looking at those numbers. Yeah.
It's like when you read like expansion now, they can be able to produce. And then like for the AP is like when like resources are scarce, like when they actually in contraction. So that's why that's the limited amount you can produce.
Okay. Still, there's a couple of I would say, flaws on that because you're saying this is the maximum capacity that they can produce.
Like this one,
But here we have some evidence that they could even
yeah,
produce before.
like if they extend their resources or like get
Okay. Any other things that you want to add?
I think the fluctuating expansions and contractions we see, those are just changes in the aggregate demand of the economy. So in the expansions, the aggregate demand goes up, inflation increases, and then it goes back. And then recession, the aggregate demand drops. But then it's like kind of constant around the full employment level.
Good. Let me just correct one thing because now you're repeating the inflation thing, and inflation could be speculated, but we don't know if this is happening. Okay, so maybe instead of referring to inflation, let's refer to what this is telling us. This is telling us that production is increasing or production is decreasing. Okay, instead of referring to inflation, let's refer more to production.
You see production increasing on the longer aggregate supply curve. Doesn't that mean like there's inflation already?
Yeah, we speculate that that could be happening beyond here, but not here. If you're growing here, no. Okay, so that's why I wanted you to be cautious when we say inflation takes place because it depends on where.
Just in the expansion.
Good, good. That makes sense. Good. Let's look at the model here and let's assume that there's no government intervention here. Big assumption. So according to the neoclassicals, remember they are saying that free markets should be left free. And the neoclassicals will consider something like this in a perfect competitive world in which there's no exogenous or external intervention in the markets. And in a perfect world for the free market thinkers, this would be the idea. Not even growing, not falling down, but just increasing over time and the markets achieving its equilibrium by themselves. Remember that according to the theory, markets just will allocate the resources automatically depending on the forces of supply and demand. So if we think about those graphs of supply and demand finding equilibrium, this is actually what we see, supply and demand fluctuating, but in average, we will find this equilibrium. So in other words, what we are seeing here is that the fluctuations of the economy, some years we can produce some amount, 120, some years we produce less, but in average, we produce 100. That's the average. Maybe no year, maybe there's no year that we produce 100, but in average, we produce 100. So the idea here is that markets are gravitating around this average. And if this is true, then we're saying the average is just suggesting us that this is the maximum capacity of the economy to produce over a long period of time. Meaning some years we produce more, some years we produce less, but this economy is producing at a certain rate that is stable, which is 100 over time. That will mean that if the economy gravitates around this green line, what comes to your mind when you think about this green line saying the economy has the ability to produce at this level over time? What graph comes to your head when you think about the ability of production? The PPF isn't. The possibility to produce is gravitating around this amount. Some years we produce more, some years we produce less, but if we are using our factors of production at its best, we are gravitating around this number. So think about that, because that is the whole concept of the PPF as we have learned it since the first day of classes. Remember, for those who were with Julia, what means point A? Looking at this PPF. Impossible. Remember, we said that at the beginning of the year. This is unattainable. But according to the neoclassical view, this is actually what is helping us to define the average. If we don't have this, we cannot define an average. We need a point here, and we need a point B here to determine the average volume. Therefore, according to the neoclassicals, the PPF is just an imaginary curve that is determined by the average of the fluctuations of the economy in a long period of time. Long period of time could be 5 years, could be 200 years, or could be 6 months. Just want to put that the long term is defined by us. We decide how much, okay? So then we have a change of view, because this is not Keynes, this is neoclassical. Now we're talking about gravitation or markets performing around an average. And that average is our PPF. Keynes said something different. Capital goods and consumption goods, just to remind us. Keynes said, this is the limit of the economy. This is the maximum capacity of the economy. We cannot produce more than here. This is unattainable, okay? Totally different view, because if we want to put, let's put it here, point X as the maximum capacity of the economy, where would be point X in that business cycle? Anyone who hasn't thought so far? We need to draw a point X here based on what Keynes argument was. Oh, no.
On the top part of the yeah.
Good.
Exactly.
If you were thinking that, that is correct, because this is what Keynes was saying. The economy cannot produce more than that. Okay, and we have evidence that the economy cannot produce more than that. These are different concepts of PPF than this. Does that make sense? Nowadays, we have accepted as the mainstream view of economics that this is more accurate than what Keynes said in the long run. And we also accept that in the short run, there's a limit of possibilities to produce. So both of them are correct. But we are going to be using this analysis from now on just to explain the supply side policies. Yeah.
What would you say the dominant school of thought is?
Supply side policy is neoclassical view, but when it comes to a particular picture on this long-term situation, we are all Keynesians, which is what's happening right now.
In a recession, they consider switching.
Yes.
But in most times.
Yes, and you will answer your question in the next 15 minutes, because you will say, why is that so? Why are we all neoclassicals in the long run, and suddenly we became Keynesians in the short run? So you will have, I know you will get that into your own head. So any questions with this, because this is fundamental to explain the supply side policies. Yeah.
And like we learned that the points on the outside was impossible, we were actually learning.
That's correct. We started with a Keynesian perspective, which is also true. There's a limit on the economy to produce. But when we start to analyze the macroeconomic policies based on the mainstream model that we are using nowadays to increase our productivity, then we refer to the PPS or PPC as we are looking at as an average. Okay? Now, let's keep building on this idea, because you may say, well, the economies of the world are not like a chemically pure, perfect competitive market, first of all. They are not stagnant over time, but what happens with the economies over time? Overall, I wouldn't mention the exceptions, but overall, what is what we expect to happen with all the economies over time with this trend line? They grow. So now we have something a little bit more realistic. Long run trend. Okay, this is actually what we want to analyze from today, because we want to look at the idea behind this slope being positive. Okay. So remember we said if the population was 100 and over time our production was 100, and if the population doesn't change, what happens with income per capita if everything is evenly distributed? If this doesn't change, everyone will earn $1 per year all the time. We call that Pareto optimum. That's actually the Pareto optimum concept of everything being in equilibrium, including our income. And because prices are not changing, production is not changing, everybody's living, I would say, the utopian world of free markets. Okay, that would be the idea. But that's not true. And this is one of the things that changes. They say that this is changing over time and it's increasing. If we keep the economy producing at 100, but the population is increasing at a faster rate, okay, then what happens with the income per capita? Decreases. So now we have an argument to say, because population increases and sometimes increases at a faster rate than production, that will be changing the 100-100, then we should pursue what? Because population grows, then we should pursue what? Grow also faster, hopefully, than the population growth, if not at the same rate. So therefore, the policies aiming, or the policy that we should aim towards is to increase this productivity of the economy in the long run, to make this actually having a positive slope. And those are what we refer to as supply side policies. So let's go to another concept, just to keep with this train of thoughts. Production versus productivity. So who would like to define what is production versus productivity? What is the difference between these two words, or even these two concepts? Tiffany, what comes to your mind when you think about production and productivity? The productivity is what? Maybe the desire drives productivity, but also the desire could drive production. Efficiency is more related with here, you would say, or with here? Okay, efficiency is a concept that we tie more towards productivity. Let's try to define then productivity.
And then production is like the whole economy, kind of like what does the economy produce?
Mm-hmm.
What productivity is like, how much do we produce per person? Like how productive is average?
Good, excellent. Now you mentioned it. Production is the amount produced. Productivity is the amount produced per factor of production. Okay, so how much are we producing per factor of production? That's the productivity concept. If we want to talk about increasing productivity and increasing production, in Q is quantity. Okay, so Keynes was more focused on increasing production because he wanted us to change from below the PPF towards the maximum capacity. So we wanted to produce more. That's what Keynes wanted to do. What is the concept here? How can we increase the production of land or the production of labor or the production of capital, which we will call it the productivity of these factors of production? How can we increase the productivity of the same amount of land or the productivity of the same workers? I would like to hear ideas from all of you. So think about one idea. One idea, because I want to go around all the class with different ideas of how to increase productivity per factor. Let's start with you and then we're going to go around. I'm going to try to make a list here. How to increase productivity? You tell me productivity of machinery or productivity of labor can be enhanced by what? By doing what? We'll come back to you. And
New technology.
technology, definitely that's something we expect. Any technological change actually going toward the factor will increase the quantity of each factor. Time.
Like schooling.
Good. So technical change, education. Education is actually the increase of technical capacities of people. Good. What else comes to your mind?
Like maybe like workers work like longer time.
I would put it more on quantity process than making the workers more productive. Actually, we want this to be increasing over time. So the same amount of time, the same person increasing its production per capita. How can we do that? Via education, yes. Via technology, yes. We're gonna come back to you if you don't have any.
Can I respond to this and to your explanation? Because there's been some research on that, and actually, like when hours can actually impact the productivity. Because, for example, in the Netherlands, they did a research program, and out of the research claimed that people do more in 32 hours of work than they do in 40 hours. So, in fact, it's not completely out of the right side.
Good. Maybe instead of putting more working hours, less working hours, so you can have more rest hours to become more productive when you're working. That's a good. Okay, then that's a good one. If anything that you want to add here. Yes, okay, let's put it here just to add more things. Improving skills or in terms of training, okay? Which is different than education. What else? Okay, let's build infrastructure. Good. Derek. Okay, good. Healthier people should be more productive. I don't see too many more. I think you have talked about many umbrellas. Any specific one that comes to your mind, Arifa? Sorry, the what? I didn't hear well the.
Willingness to work.
Oh, the willingness to work. Okay, maybe, okay, which is interesting, the culture of being productive. This idea of workaholics. I want to work more, I want to dedicate all my time to work instead of being with my family. That could enhance productivity, good. Would be a cultural shift. Luna, anything that? And how can we improve the quality of workers? Of workplace, you're saying? Okay. Good. Let's put that as a note. The quality of the workplace, which could be maybe, yeah, making people more comfortable working, therefore they will be more productive.
Yeah, I was thinking the same, like if like the governments have like things in place so that workers don't like get abused. Like I don't know. I actually don't know.
Sure, and that's fine. So the idea is that new machinery. So let's inject more newer capital goods. And practically almost everything, how you said, is kind of a technological change. Practically, instead of, well, but this.
I have a question, like bureaucracy. Could that also be an influence? Like if you have less bureaucracy in the country, because for example, right now in most like Western countries, you have to fill out a lot of forms, and does that also impact productivity, or would you say that that doesn't?
Good question. So that is related with efficiency, and that's what Sky was saying. If we make the best of each factor of production, then we are talking about efficiency, productive efficiency. But actually, we want to produce the most of each factor of production. What happens with bureaucracy is that if you have 3 people working in the same desk, then you only need 1 person. So you are not really being efficient. Therefore, you take away those 2, you just have 1, that is eliminating bureaucracy, and that is making the production of that factor production to be higher.
More like the impact on, for example, like I mentioned, like if there are less government regulations, it may be easier for like a factory to produce. They don't have to hire as many lawyers and stuff because there's less that work to do.
Good, and thank you, because this is what all of this may drive towards. If we want to actually increase our productivity, then we want less government intervention overall. That's the idea of the neoclassical perspective of no government intervention. Let the markets do their best, and even further, let people decide what do they want to do with the factors of production instead of the government regulating the way that they are using. Just to finish with the idea, we don't care if you are exploiting children. I'm going to be kind of very provocative here. We don't care if you are contaminating the waters, as long as you are taking the most and the best of it to increase our productivity. That would be the ethical part, but according to this clean, let's say, model, we don't have ethics here. The only purpose is to increase productivity. So no human rights, no environmental standards, no government telling us what to do, because each of us want to make the most money out of our factors of production. So that's why the free market will find it, because if you don't sell tacos, I will sell tacos, and I will kick you out of the market, and you will start to look at what are you best doing, and then you will do that from yourself. That the individual competition is enhanced by this idea of growth. First JP, and then I listen.
I should like, but like stuff like education and healthcare. If the government helps with better education and gives better healthcare, doesn't that help the overall productivity of the labor force?
Yes, but then I'm going to be kind of cynical here, but I will say, if the government is taking care of the education of you guys, okay, and I'm paying taxes for your education and your health, that's taking away my productivity. Because I could have used that money for maybe starting another business instead of injecting money for you to become more productive. You take care of yourself because I'm going to be taking care of myself. That's kind of the counter argument of that. Now, and just to, I saw your hand, but before going to, that's why we have some supply side policy advocates that are more pro-government, as long as the government just focuses on human capital, focusing on productivity, and education focusing on productivity. That would be the only way to accept a government intervention. Otherwise, no government. So, but you are right. That is the argument to say, if people are more educated, then they will be more productive.
Quality taken into account as well, because you could be incredibly productive, producing lots of things for a factor of production. But if the things that you're producing, are useless, is that still counts as being highly productive? Sure. Or is that, yeah?
If I'm going to produce something because I want to make profits out of it, then what I will be producing should be useful, because I need to find a market for it. Now, it doesn't mean that it's high quality. So this, for example, this is a piece of, SBS. This is not really working, but it's cheap. Someone is selling it, okay? This thing that I have in my head right now. And so the answer to your question would be, the market will decide the quality. If people want to buy this, then there's a market for this. Well, there's someone that is going to be providing. So quality is not really a standard, but just increasing and maximizing profits, regardless if it's bad quality, as long as there's a market for it. Okay. Now, this has lots of implications, because if we're talking about less government regulations, then that means that in a free market without any government, everyone should be free to decide what and how to use the factors of production that they have available. Now, this is coming from the 80s and 90s in the world. Actually, we talk about that in world politics. Remember, when we mention and we talk about the structural reforms that many countries adopted, aiming to increase the GDP of those countries, just to take those countries out of poverty. And after what, 30 years more or less, 40 years, that's your generation. But you've been born in this world. And now you are receiving the consequences of governments being very limited, regulations being very limited, firms doing whatever they want in some countries, mining industry is destroying lots of land in order to provide more factors of production, in order to make the world more productive. And now you're facing other challenges. So the world is becoming very rich, and there's lots of money being produced in the last 40 years, 50 years. But what are some of the consequences of what? Of some resources, they are starting to deplete. What else? Environmental degradation, climate change, inequalities. And again, whoever was having more access to factors of production are becoming more rich. Whoever was born in that world, you didn't have anything. Government is not investing in your education. Health services are really bad in many countries. And because government has no money, because also taxes are lower, because you don't want taxes to hinder productivity, then you have a very big gap between the rich and the poor. That's another consequence of this world that was built under these ideals in the 80s. So that's part of our evaluation of supply side policies. Let's take a break now. Okay, let's take 7 minutes. But let's come back at 3 p.m. so we can finish with the ADAS diagram, looking at these abstract ideas and putting it together to use the model that we use. Okay. I think we're gonna check here.
No, I can see that. Yeah. I think this one.
Okay, thank you. Nice. Okay, so we're taking a break. You can just stand up and go and whatever you need to do, but come back at 3 p.m., please.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. It was really fast. So
You want somebody to be in quarantine?
no, I'm fine actually. Okay, I think we'll let you.
Thank you. But you can keep the rest since you did it for me. If you want.
What's that?
You can keep the rest.
Oh, thank you, Rosh. I think it's fine. You know, I like to go out to the campus anyway, so that's an excuse to go. Yeah. Yeah.
I wish I could do the same.
Yeah, I know.
So, I had a question about it, because you constantly mention that the World Bank provides most of the money. Like I did some research yesterday, and I'm getting the impression that the World Bank is getting less and less power in that, because, for example, the bonds that the Netherlands bought to get out of this recession, not a single part of it is from the World Bank. It's all just by private banks, private hedge funds, individuals. like all smaller organizations.
Yeah, you have a good point. Actually, the
why
worldwide
is that?
Why is that? Because there's a lot of money being made by private people now. The World Bank was still maybe the last resort of lending for many countries, even in the last recession of 2008. Now, what you are saying is true. There are plenty of people who are billionaires who are willing to lend money to governments because they have more money than a government.
But the part that I mostly don't understand is at the moment the Netherlands is lending against a negative interest rate.
Mhm.
Why would you as a person want to give money with a negative interest rate?
You don't want to do that, but you have to do that because that's what the banks are telling you to do. If you don't do it, then the answer here will be you're free not to lend money if you're not receiving anything back. But what the policy is about is to provide money for people so they can start spending, and therefore you are kind of saving the economy by doing that, even if you're not earning money in the short run as a bank.
Yeah, but it's not also banks of course, but also like like the government puts out like a request for bonds basically,
Mhm.
and you can buy a part. You can buy a part in that bond. But like a lot of like insurance companies and like hedge funds and personal people, why would they invest in like a government stock with a negative rate like that you literally
I don't know. I don't know why someone would buy a bond that is not paying them back, but you have to pay back to them. I don't see any private doing that. I will see that more done by the central bank of in this case, the European Central Bank,
Yeah.
doing that just for the sake of providing money to the government. Because that's the idea, to provide the fund government so the government can actually take care of the economy. But a private, I don't think a private would be interested in that. Yeah.
That's the interesting thing because the stuff was published, and around 30% of the money provided is provided by insurance companies. That's the weird point. Like that's where I really don't understand it.
Well, it's a good point. I don't understand it too, and that would be interesting to read a bit more about why they are doing so. Yeah.
Would it have something to do with the stability of the money? And because banks are also charging negative rates, so you have to pay to keep your money on the bank as well.
Maybe that is correct. Yeah, maybe because you have to pay them, then they are going to be well, but they are not really because they are paying also to the government. They like bonds from the government that they need.
Yeah, but at least like my thought behind it was, at least when you lend it to the government, you have a fixed interest rate and it can get lower.
Mhm.
But when you keep it on the bank, what you see right now, small accounts don't get any interest rates. But if you have more than 10 million on your account, you actually have a negative interest rate of 0.5%.
That's right. You're losing money there.
Yeah, which is better than one of those government bonds. But would it be that the government bond is at least stable, and with the bank you risk that it could get even lower?
That is true. That could be true also. You know, the negative interest rates is something really new that I personally have never seen until the last recession, and it's
I
I don't
looked
understand.
it up since the beginning of the main market. It never happened.
Yeah, it never. Many economists don't understand how does it's even working because they're just injecting money without recovering it back.
Yeah, just in general, like it used to be normal to have interest rates of between like 4 and 10%,
Yeah.
and now like we haven't seen that for years.
And the thing is, because we are out of tools, you lower the interest rate and nobody's lending, so they have to go even deeper, and they don't know what else to do. Yeah. So that's remember I mentioned the other day helicopter money.
Yeah.
Just because that's the other alternative. Instead of lending it via negative interest rate, they are thinking it just to throw away the money so people start spending. Crazy idea, but it may work. Okay, we want to.
And the old version of all this word is 70. Okay,
Okay, just to finish with this topic, so we are done with this review, and then you can use hopefully these arguments for your arrays, etc. But I hope that you have now consolidated the whole map. Yeah.
That was the review?
That is a review. We're still going to talk about unemployment, but not today. I just want to use one more class to talk about unemployment because it's important to understand the unemployment analysis, but not today. That will be the next class. We have an hour for that. Okay. So we have said that supply side policies are aiming to enhance productivity. In other words, that's the main idea of supply side policies. If we enhance productivity into a country, we may expect the long run average supply or the long run ability of the economy to be producing more and more and more over time. How can we do that? Injecting technology, injecting education, reducing taxes, reducing government regulations. Everything that you have said as examples are examples of increasing productivity. And that is the main idea of supply side policies. If you think about the economy starting at 100, and over time, eventually, now is gravitating around, how much will this be, really? Maybe 20 years, now the economy, because of these policies, is gravitating around, give me a number here, more or less. Okay, you're very, I was thinking about 500 here. You're very, very prudent. Okay, maybe the word is, let's put here maybe eventually 200 because we want to have a bigger scale. Let's say the economy now is gravitating around 200 more because they have taken supply side policies. Okay. Now going from here to here, so let's call it T plus 20, means that the economy now has a greater ability to produce. Now we are gravitating around a bigger number. How can we express that in our PDF? If we have a constant, Hein, tell us what you're saying.
Well, I was saying to Alex, like, I love how you draw like really unstable economies. Because you have fluctuations of almost 90% increase, and then like a recession of almost 50%.
Yeah.
Like that's a really unstable economy.
However, I wanted to do it like that because if we don't have the expansions greater than the recessions, we won't have this as a positive trend like world.
Yeah, but you could also have like a more stable positive trend line, right?
That's correct. We can discuss about that. And let's say that this is a 3% constant rate of growth. Okay, that is this line. Remember that when we show the Keynesian before the recession and after the recession, this slope was even steeper. So it changed from a 3% to maybe a 5% growth rate. And you actually mentioned that was because Keynes was investing in infrastructure, was investing in schools during the recession, the Great Depression, and that made the economy more productive. It's exactly what we're looking at here. Yeah.
So Keynes says after the full employment rate, like it can't go further, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so like if right now the full employment rate is increasing,
Mm-hmm.
so like would you be able to draw this on a Keynesian graph? No, right?
No, good question, because you could because remember that Keynes is also right, but this is also right. These are two truths. Okay, the truth of the neoclassical and the truth of Keynes, both of them are still true. That is why the debate isn't over. In the academia and in the world and in politics, we always have this debate. Keynesian or neoclassical? Both are true. Kind of TOK question. We have two truths together. However, we need to reflect that on the Keynesian for that to happen. So I'm just going to put here a tiny Keynesian graph. And if this was year, let's call this was year 0, why full employment 0? So this was this point, wasn't it? And then suddenly we have this point, and suddenly we have this point, and they say, let's put it here. Let's point that X here. So how can we reflect that now the full employment of Keynes is actually bigger than what it was before? Now we have this full employment that Keynes was saying, this is the limit of the economy. Now the limit of the economy is even bigger than before. So how would you reflect that here? Let's think, because you're saying this full employment level now is what? Bigger or smaller? So if it's bigger,
Like, that's my question, like usually it wouldn't be able to move outwards, no?
in the short run, it won't. In the short run, we're just going from here to the limit. Let's say from here to the limit. That's our short run case.
Right.
But our long run case, after some structural changes happening in this economy, now instead of just going here and go back here, going here, go back here, now going here, down, and then again here, but in a bigger rate. So actually what we were able is to push out our full employment level plus 20. So this is T plus 20. This is this X that you can reflect it here as well. So yes, Keynes was, and now Keynes said, now we have a short-term unemployment rate, but now we have a further capacity of the economy that is its limit. Okay. Good. Now, if this is a 3% rate of growth over time, and we are saying the PPF is shifting out, what is the gap that we see here? How much is this gap each year? 3%, isn't it? This is growing by 3%. So the ability of the economy to produce is 3%. Now we have a new average in which the economy is gravitating towards that is further, okay? And that was because of productivity increase, okay? So we say productivity can be increased by just relying on the free markets, so non-interventionist policy. So let's step away as the government and let you compete. You decide how to use the factors of production, and then you will be making the best out of them, okay? Because you want to maximize your profits, you want to maximize your income, you want to maximize actually your productivity. That's the idea behind this. It's quite radical. And then the interventionist supply side policies are, well, let the government invest in education, let the government invest in healthcare, let the government invest in some roads. Here, everything should be private, okay? So we have two different views of the supply side policy. Now, if you're thinking about education here, and they say education by the government. Now, some supply side policies, some supply side policyers will actually be against this government intervention, because they say this is actually an intervention. We don't want that. But how would you convince them that the government should provide education? What would be your argument to convince me if I'm a radical free marketer?
I think the government should supply because it's a program market. Because the marginal.
And you haven't convinced me. You are blah 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 talking about too many things that you haven't convinced me yet. Alex?
They are educating unless there is a incentivized to by the government. When the more educated population will then produce more through skills learned, and the results of that will trickle back to those providing the education.
Okay, now you're starting to convince me, and then meaning what?
That if you have increased
You don't convince me. I don't care if I live in a developed country or not. I care if I have a big mansion, my big yard, and I make lots of money without paying any taxes to the government. Being cynical here. Okay, you guys, you will die. I am the one who has money. I don't care if you die, because you should actually take care of yourself. As I'm taking care of myself, why do you rely on the government? You do whatever you need to do to get educated. I will not want to pay taxes for these guys to pay your education. I paid mine in a private school. My daddy did it, so I don't care if you die. Cynical here. Again, how can we support the idea of government educating people for me to be okay with that?
And your profits will therefore increase. Secondly, you will develop a research sector, which will give you more technological advances, which will again increase your profits per person.
Now you convince me, because you're saying it's gonna be working towards my own benefit as a profit-making person, okay? And then I would say, yes, okay, then I will pay some taxes to the government. It's cheaper for me to pay taxes to the government than I have a whole pool of workers that are now educated that I can just choose, instead of just choosing and then me paying for training them, for example. So you have an argument here. So in that case, this type of education that is supported by the supply side policies are not, do you think that they will support art education from the government? Philosophy? No, they would want to provide training for jobs, training to be more productive, and trades. So instead of education, we're talking more about training programs. Public training programs. Oh, now you convince me. If the government is training you, perfect, because I'm going to hire you, and it's cheaper for me. So that now we have a situation that is not necessarily education, what these supply side policies are aiming towards, but more training to increase productivity. Yeah.
So if interventionist is some temporary government intervention, what is more permanent or more significant government intervention? What would that be? Like somebody who believes in that.
Here still from the supply side you're mentioning, or from?
Yeah, no, it's still on the supply side.
I would say
advocating more centralist, more centralized.
So they will still support public healthcare. Think about the UK.
Are they still called interventionists?
Yes, as long as you use the word public, something is because it's from the public and it's not private supporters, which is the non-government oriented, it's more free market. And even public transportation sometimes is here. Defense, for example, public defense is supported here. Law and order, someone has to maintain the law and order in the country. That's still government intervention, but very limited, just the minimum. And if you go to political philosophy, this is related with the nature of the state in terms of providing just three, or focusing on three things: private property, freedom, and life. As long as the government protects private property, freedom to do whatever you want to do, and your life, then the government shouldn't do anything else. And that's again a philosophical perspective of, think about the Republicans more or less in the US state. That's kind of the philosophical view of the Republicans, of the nature of the state. Okay, good. So just to finish the analysis of using the ADAS model, now let's finish with this GDP. Remember, we use real GDP, or we can call it national income here. That's the same thing. It's okay to use either or, and price level. Okay. Now, I'm going to refer to this red line first, and then we'll go to the green line later. Now, the limitation of this model is that this model is static. This is just a picture in time. This is not dynamic. This is not changing over time. This is just one picture. Whereas here, this we see how it's over time. So this is dynamic. Okay. So taking a picture of there, we can just say this is the economy. Which number should I put here as the GDP of this economy based on that example? So we have the 100 here again, isn't it? So if we have the 100 as the full capacity of the economy, because that's our PPF, we said that already, that means that the markets are gravitating around this full capacity, okay? This is what we call the long run aggregate supply, and it's the long run because it's the trend, remember, is where the markets will clear in the long run. And then we keep our AD as have learned because this doesn't change from the neoclassical perspective. So a pure neoclassical will tell you this is where the market's clear. And because we are focusing on markets being in equilibrium, this is where the economy produces, and this is actually our Pareto optimum, okay? However, this is true in the long run, but this is not true in the short run. Why this is not true in the short run? Why this is not happening in the short run? Yes, because we have fluctuations. Because we said that some years we can produce 120, and some years we can produce 80. Okay? And that is not reflected in this graph. So then there came this model called the consensus model, or we call it also the hybrid model, or we call it the short run and long run aggregate supply model. This does make more sense because this is combining short run fluctuations, that's the short run aggregate supply, and long run trends. So we said already that some years we produce 80 below the 100, and some years we produce 120. This is the production. Remember, the supply side is the supply curve is the production. So we're saying some years we're producing more than 100, and some years we're producing less. I want you to help me to define what could have happened in this economy that made us produce only 80 this year. Any example would be correct, and we'll play with the model according to your example. A tsunami, okay. A tsunami affected what? The capacity of producing, yeah, destroying factors of production. Good. In that case, this is the production side, isn't it? The tsunami actually made the curve to shift inwards. Okay? So we can say, I need to make it happen, so please. Let's say the tsunami made the short-run aggregate supply to shift inwards. The tsunami is a very unique example because we expect this to be a short-term fluctuation. So let's say that tsunami just turned down some factories, but the next year we were able to rebuild the factories. So that's why it's still a short-run shock from the supply side. That's why we produce it less from the supply side. Any other examples? Haim, tell us another example of maybe producing less or producing more. It doesn't really matter. Let's start with Haim and then JP. COVID right now. What was affected because of COVID? The supplier or the demand?
In this case, both the supplier and
sure. Let's elaborate the example. Why suppliers were producing less because of COVID? Factor of production.
Because certain goods couldn't come in or certain people couldn't come to work.
Good. Great example of the COVID affecting the supply side. But also the COVID affected the consumption side. We're not getting out of our homes. So let's just put separate variables in one shock. Also the demand side was affected. So perhaps now we have here the aggregate demand shifting in and the supply shifting inward. So now we have here the 80 that we wanted. Okay. So we have a double shock. Demand and supply shifting inwards because of COVID. Next year, we expect this to go back to its equilibrium. But this year was less production. And then we can see, oh, okay, this is the recession that we're looking at here in the business cycle. Okay. Now help me to build examples for producing more any year. Why this economy can produce more or be able to consume even more? What happened? Okay, maybe there was a technological change. I want to refer to short-term shocks instead of a new structural change of the economy. So let's leave technology for 1 second. Tiffany. Of what? Let's try to put lower prices of factors of production. Yeah. So maybe because of oil being so cheap, now firms are able to produce more with lower costs. So that is shifting out the aggregate supply here. And that was a temporary shift because eventually if oil goes back, they will come back here. So it's a short-term fluctuation again from the production side. Help me to make an aggregate demand shifting out to match this 120. Okay, maybe now consumers are consuming more type of goods that this economy is able to produce. Masks, let's use the mask example. So instead, before they were producing a certain amount of masks, now the demand of masks overall is pushing the whole aggregate demand. And now we have this equilibrium of this economy right now is producing more because of the mask being demanded, for example. So we have also a demand side shock. Yeah, Jaime.
I'm not sure about this one, but for example, the dot-com bubble, would that also be an aggregate demand thing or not? Because it's such a big part of the economy.
Yeah, and then what happened with the dot-com bubble?
It crashed, and like a lot of people got like out of a job. Like a big part of the GDP was gone.
So then that was an inward shift
And
of the demand.
investment decreased.
Good. So all of those could be considered short-term shocks, and then again, when they recover, we go back to our normal. So what we are playing here are shocks from the demand side and shocks from the supply side that are not structural or not permanent. Okay, those fluctuations are actually explaining these fluctuations, isn't it? The fluctuations that we see here, the bubble shock, the COVID shock, then there was a good year of crops, then we're producing more, etc. So all these shocks are a consequence of markets reacting from the supply and the demand side. And where is this coming from? Our individual behavior. If you come to Pearson College, what's happening with Mechosin pizza? In a normal year, not this year, because I know you are. What happened with, if this is the Mechosin pizza supply and demand diagram? Pearson College students come. Yeah, demand shifts out. And then you leave for the winter break, goes back here. And then you go for the summer, they even go deeper because everybody goes away from Mechosin, and then go back here. So this demand and supply just for the pizzas from Mechosin is performing in a way that in aggregate level, all the restaurants in Canada will actually be reflected in the aggregate demand of the country. So our individual behavior soon will be reflected here. So this is actually what makes sense when we see all neoclassicals make sense when we add the short run. So this is true too. Keynes is right, and these guys also are right. Only if we add the short run, okay? And then just to finish, because this is just very starting an economy, this is the red line. So what is the purpose of supply side policies if we make a dynamic graph here? Very quickly. Average supply in the short run, average demand, full employment. Now we have defined the full employment as this average, and I'm going to add here, there's a certain rate of unemployment because there are some people who are still here not working. I'm going to put a number, maybe 5% of the population of the labor force is willing to work, but they are searching for jobs here. And if there's a need for them to be absorbed, then the economy can absorb them temporarily, and eventually they will come back here. So that is why this unemployment rate is not zero, because there are still people willing to work. The 0% of unemployment is where Keynes was saying, okay, this is the limit of the economy. Remember, that was the full employment level of Keynes. So now we are combining Keynes with the neoclassical model. We have our full employment according to the neoclassicals, and our full employment, 0% of unemployment of Keynes. So this graph is actually the real graph combining both. The IB doesn't care if you don't use this, but we want to use this for analysis of we can use Keynesian or neoclassical analysis using that. Now, yeah, Susan. The average demand is always a short run. We don't have a long run average demand because the average demand keeps fluctuating all the time. The production is what we have an average of demand and supply, and this is what the economy can produce because there's someone consuming. Now, just to finish, if this is year 0, okay, and at year 0 we're producing 100. This is it, okay. I want to draw in that graph year 20, and year 20 we're producing 200. What should I do? What should you do actually in order to reflect year 20? Excellent. So what is happening is that the whole economy now is producing at the new full employment at year 20. And now we have again the short run fluctuations that are going to happen and gravitate around this new normal, which is the new long run average supply. That's why we have a straight line here in which the economy is gravitating. What happened to go from here to here? What did we do with this economy? Reduce taxes, reduce regulations, increase productivity, in other words. So based on the supply side policies, we achieved that. And this is where the world is right now. We want to keep pushing this, assuming that the world has infinite resources, which is not true. So this is where we are right now. Evaluate 4 macroeconomic goals before we go. I'm going to put here check marks. The first one was GDP. The second one was reduce unemployment. The third one was stable inflation or stable prices. And the last one was X minus M. So who wants to help us to see if we can mark our checks in order to find the 4 macroeconomic goals? Tiffany, what would you do with the first one? What can we say about the first one? Has growth increased? Check. So yes, that's one goal that we achieved. The other one, how about unemployment? Check. Instead of having a 5% of unemployment, we may have here maybe 3% of natural rate of unemployment. Good. According to the graph that I just draw, what's happening with the price level? Check. And we expect, because the supply is shifting out, both because of more productivity, and also the demand is shifting out, because when you shift this out, means that the investment is also shifting out. So sometimes even the demand is shifting out in a smaller rate than the supply. So we may even have deflation, but a positive deflation. We're having cheaper prices because now we are more productive. So good, check. And if the price level of this economy is telling us our goods are now cheaper to buy from the rest of the world, what do you think is happening here? Now people are very
cheaper, more export.
So that could be something beneficial. We said that not always is beneficial, but if that was the goal, check. Now this could be very bad quality goods. Who cares if we are receiving money from the gringos? That's okay. But that's a different discussion. That's more, again, the type of goods that we're talking about. So to end the whole class and the